The hallway outside the operating room was cold. I remember that more than anything else from that night. The particular chill of a hospital corridor at 11 o'clock, the kind of cold that has nothing to do with temperature and everything to do with fear. I was sitting in a plastic chair with my father's wallet in my lap. The paramedics had handed it to me along with his shoes, almost as an afterthought, and I had been holding both for almost 2 hours without realizing it. A nurse came out around midnight. She had kind eyes and a tired face, the look of someone near the end of a long shift who still cared enough to crouch down to my level instead of standing over me. She asked if there was anyone else coming. Family, she said, someone to sit with me. I told her no. She asked if I had tried calling them. I had tried, 11 times between my brother Jason and my brother Tyler. 11 calls that went straight to voicemail or rang out completely. I told the nurse I would be fine on my own. She patted my hand once and went back through the doors. I sat there a while longer. And because there was nothing else to do with my hands, I opened my phone and scrolled to the family group chat, the one we all used for birthdays and holiday planning and the occasional photo of someone's dog. What I found in that chat had nothing to do with our father lying unconscious 1 floor above me. It was a conversation between my 2 brothers, 3 weeks old, about selling our parents' house, about a buyer they had already lined up, about how they needed to handle things carefully so our father would not change his mind once he found out what they were planning. I read it twice to make sure I understood what I was looking at. Then I closed the phone, set it face down on my knee, and looked at the closed doors of the operating room. My father was in there fighting for his life, and my brothers, it turned out, had not missed 11 phone calls because they were busy. They had missed them because they did not want to be found. My name is Claire Whitman. I am 34 years old. I work as a nurse at a hospital across town from the one my father was admitted to that night. I have spent 12 years caring for strangers, and somewhere along the way I became the person in my own family who did the same thing for free. I am the middle child. I have an older brother named Jason and a younger brother named Tyler. Growing up, I was the quiet one between them, the one nobody worried about because I never gave anyone a reason to worry. This is the story of one night that changed everything I believed about my family. It did not start with the heart attack. It started years earlier in the small, quiet ways most things start. I grew up in a house where attention moved in 2 directions, and I happened to stand in the space between them. Jason was 4 years older than me. He played football in high school, and on Friday nights our parents sat in the bleachers cheering loud enough that the neighbors 2 rows down used to comment on it. He was not unkind to me. He simply existed in a world that revolved naturally around him, the way the oldest child sometimes does in families that have not learned yet how attention gets divided. Tyler was 3 years younger. He was the baby of the family, and everyone treated him that way long after he stopped being a baby. When he struggled in school, my parents hired tutors. When he wanted a car at 16, my father spent a weekend helping him pick one out. When he changed his college major twice, nobody questioned it. I was in the middle. I want to be fair here. My parents loved me. I never doubted that. But love in our house was loud for my brothers and quiet for me, and quiet love has a way of disappearing into the background of a busy household. I got good grades without anyone needing to push me. I did my chores without being asked twice. I rarely caused problems, which meant I rarely received the kind of attention that comes from solving a problem. There is a particular kind of invisibility that comes from being reliable. People stop noticing you the same way they stop noticing a chair that has always been in the same corner of the room. It is not unkindness. It is simply how attention works. The chair does not need anything, so nobody looks at the chair. I became very good at being the chair. By the time I left for nursing school, I had already learned the lesson that would shape the rest of my life. If I wanted to be noticed, I needed to be needed. So I made myself needed in every way I could. After college, both of my brothers moved away for their careers. Jason went into sales and settled 2 states over with his wife and kids. Tyler bounced between cities for a few years before landing in a tech job 3 hours north. I stayed close. I took a nursing position 20 minutes from my parents' house, and over time, without anyone formally deciding it, I became the family's emergency contact. Not on paper, in practice. When my mother needed someone to drive her to a doctor's appointment, she called me. When my father's blood pressure medication needed adjusting and he wanted someone to sit with him at the pharmacy while they sorted it out, he called me. When the water heater broke on a Sunday and they needed someone to deal with the repair company, I was the one who took the call. My brothers visited on holidays. They called occasionally. They were not bad sons, not in any way that would show up clearly if you listed their behavior on paper. But there is a difference between being present for the planned moments and being present for the unplanned ones. I was always present for the unplanned ones. I never resented this exactly. I want to be honest about that. I loved my parents and showing up for them felt like the natural extension of who I already was. But somewhere in the back of my mind, a quiet account was being kept. Not out of bitterness, just out of the simple human habit of noticing patterns. The pattern was this: when something good happened, the whole family celebrated together. When something hard happened, I handled it alone. I told myself that was simply the shape of our family and that the shape did not need to mean anything more than that. I was wrong about that. But I would not understand how wrong until the night my father's heart stopped working the way it was supposed to. It happened on a Tuesday evening in March. My mother called me at 7:15. Her voice had the particular shake in it that I had come to recognize after years of nursing, the sound of someone trying very hard to stay calm while everything inside them is moving too fast. My father had collapsed in the kitchen. She had already called the ambulance. She needed me to meet them at the hospital because she could not drive in the state she was in. I left work immediately. I did not bother changing out of my scrubs. By the time I arrived, my father was already being taken back for emergency evaluation. A heart attack, the doctor said, significant blockage. They needed to operate quickly. My mother sat beside me in the waiting room, gripping my hand so tightly it left marks. I called Jason first. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. I left a message, calm and clear, telling him what had happened and asking him to call back immediately. I called Tyler next. Same result. Voicemail. I left the same message. An hour passed. I called again. Voicemail again. My mother, exhausted and overwhelmed, eventually had to be taken home by a neighbor who had come to sit with her because the stress had triggered her own health concerns and the doctors did not want 2 patients in the family that night. That left me alone in the hospital. I called both my brothers 4 more times each over the following 2 hours. Every single call went unanswered. I sent texts. I sent the same information in a clear, simple message, the kind of message that leaves no room for confusion about how serious the situation was. Nothing came back. I sat in that cold hallway, signing consent forms as the closest available family member, answering questions about my father's medical history from memory, and waiting for any sign that my brothers had received what I sent them. That is when I opened the family group chat. That is when I found out why they had not answered. The conversation was 3 weeks old, buried under the usual mix of holiday planning messages and forwarded jokes that nobody ever really reads. It was between Jason and Tyler. A private side conversation, the kind people sometimes start without realizing the rest of the family can technically still see it if they scroll back far enough. They had been talking about our parents' house, not maintenance, not a visit, a sale. Jason had been in contact with a real estate investor who wanted to buy the property, tear it down, and build something new on the lot. The number being discussed was significant, more than I expected the house to be worth, which explained the interest. The messages went back and forth about timing, about how to bring it up with our father in a way that would make him agree quickly, about the fact that our mother would likely be more resistant, and that it might be easier to get our father on board first, since he tended to make financial decisions without consulting her as carefully as he should. One message from Tyler stood out to me more than the others. He had written that they needed to move on this before our father had any kind of health scare that might complicate things legally. I read that line 3 times. Before our father had any kind of health scare. My father was currently in surgery, and 3 weeks earlier, my brothers had been planning around the possibility of exactly that happening, treating it as a logistical hurdle rather than something that might actually devastate our family. I sat very still in that plastic chair. I was not angry in the way I expected to be. The feeling that moved through me was quieter than anger. It was something closer to clarity. A long, slow recalibration of everything I had assumed about where I stood in this family and where my brothers actually stood. I put the phone away. I did not respond. I did not call them again that night. I simply waited for my father to come out of surgery because that was the only thing that mattered in that moment. The surgery took almost 4 hours. I sat alone in that hallway for most of it. A colleague from my own hospital, a nurse named Rebecca who I had worked alongside for years, happened to be picking up her sister from a different department when she saw me sitting there. She recognized my scrubs before she recognized my face. She sat down beside me without asking if she should. She did not ask many questions. She simply stayed, bringing me a cup of coffee from the vending machine and sitting in silence when I did not feel like talking. I want to mention Rebecca specifically because in a night defined by the absence of people who should have been there, her presence meant more to me than I can fully explain. She had no obligation to stay. She stayed anyway. Around 2 in the morning, the surgeon came out. My father had survived. The blockage had been significant, but they had managed to repair it. He would need to stay in the hospital for several days, but the prognosis, given the circumstances, was good. I cried for the first time that night, sitting in that plastic chair with Rebecca's hand on my shoulder. I called my mother to tell her the news. I did not call my brothers. I did not have the energy left for another set of unanswered calls. I stayed at the hospital the rest of the night, sleeping in short, broken stretches in the chair beside my father's recovery room, waking every time a nurse came in to check his vitals, the same way I imagine he must have once checked on me when I was small and sick and could not sleep through the night myself. By morning, he was stable enough to speak in short sentences. He looked at me, confused at first, and then his eyes focused. He asked where his sons were. I told him I did not know. It was the truest answer I had. They showed up 2 days later, not separately. Together, walking through the hospital doors within minutes of each other, having apparently coordinated their arrival, which told me something on its own. I was in the recovery room with my father when they arrived. He had been moved out of intensive care and into a regular room by then, sitting up, color returning to his face, talking with more strength each day. Jason walked in first, holding a small bouquet of flowers from the gift shop downstairs. Tyler followed close behind with a card he had clearly purchased at the same shop minutes earlier. They both went straight to our father's bedside. They both expressed relief and concern in the practiced, easy way people do when they have rehearsed something in the car on the way over. I stood near the window and watched. After a few minutes of pleasantries, Jason mentioned, almost casually, that once Dad was feeling a bit stronger, they had something important to discuss with him. Something about the house. Nothing urgent, he said. Just something they wanted his thoughts on while everyone was together. I watched my father's face shift slightly. Confused but willing to engage, the way a man recovering from heart surgery often is, eager to feel useful and included rather than fragile. That was the moment I understood I needed to say something before this conversation went any further. I asked Jason and Tyler to step into the hallway with me. They followed, slightly puzzled, the easy confidence on their faces beginning to falter just slightly, the way it does when someone senses a shift in the room without yet understanding why. I did not raise my voice. I want that to be clear. Everything I said that morning, I said calmly, the same way I deliver difficult news to patients and families at my own job, because I have learned that calm delivery carries more weight than anger ever could. I told them I had seen their messages, the conversation about the house, the buyer, the timing strategy built around our father's health. Jason started to explain. He used words like misunderstanding and out of context. I told him I had read it twice, and there was no version of those messages that read as anything other than what they were. Tyler tried a different approach, telling me I was overreacting, that nothing had actually been decided, that it was just an early conversation between brothers exploring options. I asked him a simple question. I asked whether either of them had called our mother that night, or me, or come to the hospital at any point during the 11 hours our father was in surgery and recovery before they finally appeared. Neither of them answered. I told them I was not going to fight with them in a hospital hallway. I told them that whatever they had been planning, they were going to explain it to our father themselves, honestly and completely, with me in the room. Then I walked back into that hospital room before either of them could argue, and I sat down beside my father's bed, and I waited for my brothers to follow. They followed. What happened next was not loud. There was no dramatic confrontation, no raised voices. My father listened as Jason, prompted gently and firmly by me, explained the real reason for their visit, this time without the version of events designed to sound better than it was. My father was quiet for a long moment after they finished. He looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with the surgery. He asked one question. He asked whether they had been planning this while he was in the operating room. Jason admitted the conversation had started 3 weeks earlier before anything had happened to him. My father nodded slowly. He did not raise his voice either. He simply said that he needed some time to think and that he wanted to speak with his lawyer once he was released from the hospital. 2 weeks later, once he was home and steady, he did exactly that. I was not part of those conversations in detail and I did not ask to be, but I learned eventually that he had made some changes. The house was not for sale, and certain decisions about his estate, decisions that had previously assumed an equal division without much thought behind it, had been reconsidered with a clearer understanding of who had actually shown up when it mattered. He told me once, several months later, sitting at his kitchen table over coffee, that the surgery had taught him something he wished he had understood sooner. He said that for years he had assumed love looked the same in everyone, that it simply expressed itself differently depending on a person's personality. He said the hospital had taught him that was not entirely true. Some love shows up loud at football games and graduation parties. Other love shows up quietly in cold hallways at midnight, holding someone's shoes because there was nowhere else to put them. He said he was sorry it took him so long to notice the difference. I told him he did not need to apologize. He said he did and that he was doing it anyway. It has been almost a year since that night. My father is doing well. His recovery has been steady and he walks every morning now, something his doctor recommended and something he has stuck with more faithfully than anyone expected. My relationship with my brothers has changed in ways that are hard to summarize simply. We are not estranged. We still speak, still see each other at holidays. But something that used to be unspoken and unexamined between us is now clearly understood by everyone involved. The pattern that existed for years, the one where I showed up and they did not, is no longer something I am willing to quietly accept as simply the shape of our family. I still work as a nurse. I still care for strangers with the same attention I once gave freely and without question to everyone in my own family. But I have learned to notice the difference between showing up because you love someone and showing up because someone is counting on you to always be the one who does. I think about that cold hallway often, the plastic chair, my father's shoes in my lap, the quiet, clarifying moment of reading those messages and understanding finally where I actually stood. I do not regret being the one who shows up. I think showing up for the people you love is one of the most meaningful things a person can do. What I have learned to do differently is notice who shows up for me in return. That distinction has changed everything. If this story meant something to you, share it with someone who has always been the one who shows up. They deserve to know they are seen.